My family laughed when I packed my bags and moved out. They said I'd come crawling back within a month because I couldn't survive without them. They had no idea every mortgage payment, utility bill, business loan, and tax payment quietly depended on one person, me. The day every single bill landed on their doorstep with my name missing from the account, their confidence disappeared faster than their money. If you think family can never betray you, stick with me because this story only gets worse. Before we dive into it, tell me in the comments where you're from. I love seeing the different places people tune in from. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss more stories like this. My name is Aloan Hart, and for years I was the invisible backbone of my family. On paper, I was just a financial consultant. At home, I was the one quietly making sure every mortgage payment cleared, every utility stayed on, every insurance policy remained active, and every tax deadline was met. My parents never thanked me because they believed my father handled everything, while I worked behind the scenes without asking for recognition. Instead, all their praise went to my younger brother, Cade, the so-called golden child who could do no wrong. They celebrated his every success while treating me like unpaid help. The breaking point came during a large family celebration when my mother publicly humiliated me over a simple accident, and no one defended me. Cade laughed, my father looked away, and the rest of the family acted as though I deserved it. In that moment, I realized nothing I did would ever earn their respect. So I quietly packed one suitcase, walked out without an argument, and left them convinced I'd be back begging within weeks. They couldn't have been more wrong. Growing up, I learned early that love in my family seemed to come with conditions. I was never the favorite child, and no matter how hard I worked, my efforts were expected rather than appreciated. When I started my career after college, I naturally stepped in whenever money became tight. At first it was covering a late utility payment, then helping with the mortgage, and eventually taking responsibility for nearly every financial problem that came our way. I refinanced expensive debts, negotiated lower interest rates with lenders, handled overdue taxes, and found solutions whenever the family business faced another crisis. There were even months when I quietly used my own savings to keep the business running because I couldn't bear to see everything my parents had built disappear. I never mentioned those sacrifices because I believed family looked after one another. What hurt wasn't the work, it was how invisible it made me. My parents acted as though helping them was simply my responsibility, never something worth acknowledging. There was no thank you, no appreciation, just another expectation waiting around the corner. Meanwhile, my younger brother, Cade, lived a completely different life. He drove new trucks, took expensive vacations, and enjoyed constant praise despite contributing almost nothing to the household. Every achievement of his became a family celebration, while my sacrifices went unnoticed. Whenever I tried to point out how unfair everything felt, I was accused of being jealous or selfish. Eventually, I stopped arguing. I realized my family didn't value me for who I was. They valued what I could quietly fix, pay for, and carry without ever asking for anything in return. The moment that finally broke me came during Cade's engagement celebration. My parents had spared no expense because he was marrying Ava, the daughter of a well-known local businessman. The house was filled with relatives, business associates, and family friends, all congratulating Cade as if he had accomplished something extraordinary. I spent most of the evening helping in the background, making sure everything ran smoothly while everyone else enjoyed themselves. Near the end of the party, I picked up a tray of drinks to help the caterers. Before I could reach the table, someone brushed hard against my shoulder. The tray slipped from my hands, and glasses shattered across the floor. The music stopped, and every head turned toward me. Instead of asking if I was okay, my mother immediately began yelling. She called me careless and embarrassing, making sure every guest could hear her. My father didn't defend me. He simply pointed at the broken glass and ordered me to clean it up immediately. Cade laughed and joked that at least I had finally found something I was good at. Even Ava smiled as if the whole scene were entertaining. I knelt on the floor gathering broken pieces while conversations quietly resumed around me. No one offered to help. No one told my parents they had gone too far. As I cleaned, something inside me changed. I realized I could spend the rest of my life sacrificing for these people and still never earn their respect. After the last guest left, I packed a single suitcase, gathered my personal documents, and quietly drove to a small apartment I had rented weeks earlier. Before sunrise, I was gone without saying goodbye. When I left, no one came after me. There were no phone calls asking if I was safe or messages wondering where I had gone. Instead, I later learned that my family treated my departure as if they had won some kind of battle. My mother told relatives the house finally felt peaceful without my constant attitude. Cade bragged that he didn't need me anymore because Ava's wealthy family had far more money and influence than I ever could. My father insisted I had always exaggerated my importance and claimed the family would be better off without someone who constantly complained. Hearing those words hurt, but they also confirmed I had made the right decision. What they didn't understand was that I had never been trying to prove my value. I had simply been keeping everything together behind the scenes. Every automatic payment, every insurance renewal, every reminder for property taxes, every vendor account, and every financial spreadsheet had been organized through systems I personally created over the years. None of those accounts belonged to me, so I didn't sabotage anything. I simply removed my personal access, canceled the services registered under my name, and transferred every responsibility back to the people who legally owned them. I left detailed records exactly where they could find them and walked away. I wasn't trying to punish anyone. I wasn't looking for revenge or hoping they would fail. I just stopped doing work that had never been appreciated. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to focus on building my own life instead of carrying everyone else's. My family celebrated my absence, completely unaware that the quiet stability they had always taken for granted had walked out the front door with me. It didn't take long for reality to catch up with my family. Just a few weeks after I moved out, the first overdue notices began showing up in the mailbox. At first, they ignored them, assuming there had been some mistake. Then the mortgage reminder arrived, followed by late notices from the utility companies. Before long, insurance renewal deadlines were missed, vendor invoices started piling up, and property tax payments became overdue. The organized system they had relied on for years had quietly disappeared, and they had no idea how to replace it. Instead of accepting responsibility, everyone searched for someone else to blame. My mother insisted the bank must have made an error. My father argued that the accounting software had probably failed. Cade confidently claimed an accountant would sort everything out in a day or two and acted as though none of it was a serious problem. But the bills kept coming, and each envelope brought another penalty, another warning, or another overdue balance. What had started as a few missed payments quickly turned into a growing financial mess. My father became increasingly frustrated as late fees continued to grow. He spent hours making phone calls, only to realize he didn't know the passwords, account numbers, or payment schedules that had kept everything running for years. Cade couldn't answer any questions because he had never bothered to learn how any of it worked. For the first time, they understood that the household hadn't managed itself. Someone had been quietly handling every detail without recognition or appreciation. That someone had been me. The systems I built weren't complicated because they were impossible to understand, they only seemed effortless because I had spent years making sure no one else ever had to think about them. About a month after I moved out, there was a sharp knock on my apartment door. When I opened it, I found my parents standing there with Cade behind them. They looked tired and frustrated, but not once did I see regret on their faces. For a brief moment, I thought they had come to apologize or at least ask how I was doing. Instead, my father walked in as though he owned the place and immediately told me it was time to come home. He said the family needed me and expected me to fix the financial problems that had suddenly appeared. My mother nodded in agreement, acting as though returning was simply my responsibility. Before I could answer, Cade accused me of deliberately creating the mess. He claimed I had sabotaged the family by leaving and insisted none of the overdue bills would have happened if I had stayed. I listened without interrupting, then calmly explained the truth. I hadn't touched a single account after moving out. I hadn't canceled anyone's mortgage, ignored tax notices, or stopped payments that belonged to them. Every missed deadline was the responsibility of the people whose names were on those accounts. All I had done was step away from work that was never mine to carry forever. My explanation only made them angrier. Instead of accepting responsibility, they called me selfish, ungrateful, and cruel for refusing to help. They walked out still convinced I was the villain in their story. As I closed the door behind them, I finally understood something that had taken years to see. They didn't miss me as a daughter. They missed having someone who quietly cleaned up every problem they created. After my family left, I decided to stop looking backward and focus on building the life I had always postponed for everyone else's sake. Without the constant pressure, criticism, and endless emergencies waiting for me every day, I finally had the time and energy to invest in my own career. The difference was almost immediate. My work became sharper, my confidence slowly returned, and I started seeing opportunities one had ignored for years because I had been too busy solving my family's problems. A few months later, I met Grant Rowan, a respected investment executive known for helping struggling companies recover through smart financial planning. He had reviewed one of my financial restructuring projects and was impressed by how I approached difficult situations with practical solutions instead of risky shortcuts. After several meetings, he offered me a position at his private investment firm. It was the kind of opportunity one had once believed was beyond my reach. For the first time in my professional life, I worked alongside people who respected my knowledge instead of expecting me to quietly fix everything without recognition. My ideas were heard during meetings, my recommendations influenced important decisions, and my work earned genuine appreciation. Every successful project strengthened my confidence, and before long, I became one of the firm's most trusted financial strategists. I finally understood what it felt like to be valued for my abilities rather than used for my willingness to help. While my career continued to grow, I occasionally heard updates about my family through distant relatives. Their financial problems had only become worse. The responsibilities they once dismissed as simple had become impossible to ignore, and the stability they had always taken for granted was nowhere to be found. They were finally experiencing the weight I had quietly carried alone for years. Several months into my new role, Grant assigned me to review a portfolio of distressed business loans that our firm had recently acquired. It was part of a major restructuring project involving several companies that had fallen behind on their financial obligations. I settled into my office, opened the files, and began reading through the reports one by one. Everything felt routine until I reached two familiar company names. I stopped reading for a moment, certain I had to be mistaken. One account belonged to my father's business. The other was connected to the company owned by Ava's family, the same people preparing to join ours through Kate's engagement. For a few seconds, I simply stared at the documents. Neither family had any idea that the investment firm handling their debt was now the one I worked for. Even more surprising, our firm held significant control over the restructuring process that would determine how those businesses moved forward. It felt like an unbelievable coincidence, but the paperwork was clear. Grant noticed my expression and walked over to my desk. After looking at the files, he immediately understood why I had gone silent. Instead of asking personal questions, he calmly reminded me that our firm had built its reputation on professionalism and fairness. He told me no one expected me to treat the accounts differently because of my family history. Every decision would be based on facts, financial performance, and company policy. I appreciated his confidence in me. The truth was, I had no interest in using my position for revenge. My family had made their own choices, and those choices had consequences. I didn't want to humiliate them or settle old scores. I only wanted every client, including my own relatives, to receive the same fair treatment everyone else received. A few weeks later, both families hosted an extravagant engagement gala for Kate and Ava. Even though their finances were clearly under pressure, they spared no expense because they wanted to impress local business leaders, investors, and influential guests. Expensive decorations filled the ballroom, a live band played throughout the evening, and every detail was carefully planned to project success. I had no intention of attending until Grant explained that several confidential business discussions related to our firm's restructuring plans would take place after the celebration. My presence was necessary, so I agreed to go strictly for work. The moment I walked into the venue, I could feel the familiar judgment in the room. Relatives exchanged whispers, convinced I had returned because I had nowhere else to go. Some looked at me with pity, while others wore satisfied smiles, believing I had finally admitted defeat. No one asked why I was there. They simply assumed the story they wanted to believe. My mother spotted me almost immediately. Without greeting me or asking how I had been, she walked over, picked up a serving tray from one of the catering tables, and placed it into my hands. She quietly told me that if I insisted on showing up, I could at least make myself useful and avoid embarrassing the family. Her words were calm, but the message was painfully familiar. For a brief moment, I considered walking out. Instead, I accepted the tray without arguing. I wasn't there to reopen old wounds or create a public confrontation before the business meeting began. I knew why I had come, and I refused to let another moment of disrespect distract me from the career and life I had worked so hard to build. I kept my attention on the tray and moved carefully through the crowded ballroom, hoping to avoid drawing any attention. Guests laughed, music played softly, and conversations filled the room. I was only a few steps from one of the tables when another guest turned without looking and slammed into my shoulder. The tray slipped from my hands, and plates and glasses crashed onto the polished floor. The loud noise echoed through the ballroom, causing every conversation to stop. Dozens of eyes immediately turned toward me. My mother's expression hardened with embarrassment. Instead of asking whether I was hurt, she sharply ordered me to clean up the mess before anyone got injured. My father nodded in agreement as though it were the most obvious thing in the world. Cade smirked and muttered that I was making another scene. I quietly knelt down and began picking up the broken pieces, refusing to argue in front of so many people. Before I could gather everything, a chair scraped loudly against the floor near the head table. The sound drew everyone's attention. Grant Rowan slowly stood, his expression calm but serious. The entire ballroom fell silent as he walked toward me. Then, in a voice clear enough for every guest to hear, he said, "Miss Hart, our board is waiting for your final decision." For a second, no one moved. Then every executive seated with Grant rose to their feet as well, waiting respectfully for my response. The atmosphere changed instantly. My parents stared in complete disbelief. Cade looked from me to the executives, unable to understand what was happening. Across the room, Ava's family exchanged nervous glances, realizing they had misunderstood exactly who I was. No one in the ballroom spoke. The silence was so complete that I could hear the faint sound of broken glass being swept into a dustpan nearby. My mother still looked confused, while my father stared at Grant as if waiting for him to admit it was all some misunderstanding. Instead, Grant stepped forward with the calm confidence that had earned him respect throughout the business community. He politely explained that I wasn't part of the catering staff, unemployed, or relying on my family for support. I was the lead financial strategist at his investment firm, responsible for evaluating major restructuring projects and advising the board on high-value commercial accounts. The executives standing behind him weren't there out of courtesy. They were waiting because my recommendations would influence the firm's final decisions. Grant continued by revealing something neither family had expected. The investment group had recently acquired the majority of the commercial debt connected to both my father's company and Ava's family's business. Those accounts were now under professional review, and I was one of the people overseeing that process. Every decision would be made according to financial performance and company policy, not personal relationships. The color drained from Cade's face. His confident smile disappeared as the truth settled over the room. My father opened his mouth several times but couldn't find a single word to say. My mother looked at me with disbelief, finally realizing how badly she had underestimated me. Around the ballroom, guests exchanged stunned glances as they remembered the way my family had treated me only moments earlier. For years they had dismissed me as unimportant, never realizing that the woman they constantly belittled now held significant influence over the financial future of both families' businesses. the atmosphere in the ballroom changed within minutes. The confidence my family had carried all evening disappeared, replaced by panic and uncertainty. My mother was the first to approach me. Tears filled her eyes as she apologized for the way she had treated me over the years. She insisted she had never meant to hurt me and begged me not to let the family's mistakes ruin everything they had worked for. My father stood beside her in uncomfortable silence before quietly admitting they had underestimated me. Hearing those words should have felt satisfying, but they couldn't erase years of being ignored and taken for granted. Cade stepped forward next. The same brother who had mocked me only moments earlier now claimed he had always loved me. He said the jokes had been harmless and that our family had simply made mistakes. Before I could answer, Ava's father joined the conversation. His confident attitude was gone. Knowing his company was tied to the same financial review, he urgently asked whether our firm could offer favorable repayment terms to protect both businesses and save the engagement from falling apart. I listened without interrupting. I wasn't angry anymore, and I didn't want revenge. Calmly, I explained that respect should never depend on how much money someone has or how much influence they suddenly discover another person possesses. If they had treated me with kindness before learning my position, this conversation would have been very different. I made one thing perfectly clear. I would not use my role to punish them, but I would not abuse it to protect them either. Their companies would receive the same objective review, repayment options, and professional standards that every other client received. Fairness, not favoritism, would guide every decision from that day forward. Once the restructuring process moved forward, both families had to face the reality they had avoided for years. Since no special treatment was given, they were required to meet the same financial obligations as every other client. The easy lifestyle they had proudly displayed could no longer be maintained. Luxury vehicles were sold, a vacation home was put on the market, and several unnecessary investments were liquidated to reduce their debt. Every decision was difficult, but they were the natural consequences of years of poor financial planning and depending on someone else's quiet sacrifices. The pressure also exposed cracks in Cade's relationship with Ava. As the true condition of both families' finances became impossible to hide, she realized the image of endless wealth and security had been greatly exaggerated. After several tense weeks filled with arguments and uncertainty, she ended the engagement. It was a painful outcome, but it forced everyone involved to stop pretending that appearances mattered more than honesty. My parents eventually accepted that they could no longer afford the large house they had once been so proud of. They sold it and moved into a smaller, more modest home that fit their actual budget. For the first time, they handled their own bills, tracked their expenses, and learned how much effort it took to keep everything organized. Those responsibilities had never been effortless, they had simply never noticed the work because I had always carried it alone. I didn't celebrate their losses because none of this happened out of revenge. Their hardships came from years of entitlement, careless choices, and the belief that I would always step in to fix every problem, no matter how little appreciation or respect they showed me. Sometimes consequences are the greatest teachers life can offer. Looking back now, I understand that families rarely fall apart because of one cruel moment. The damage begins much earlier, through countless small moments when gratitude disappears, respect fades, and one person's kindness slowly becomes everyone else's expectation. I didn't leave home because of a single embarrassing night at Cade's engagement party. That moment simply opened my eyes to a truth I had been avoiding for years. I had spent so much time protecting my family that I forgot to protect myself. Moving out was never an act of revenge. I wasn't trying to punish my parents or make my brother's life more difficult. I simply stopped carrying responsibilities that were never meant to belong to me alone. When the bills went unpaid and the financial problems surfaced, they didn't create the family's downfall. They revealed who had quietly been holding everything together all along. The systems I built, the sacrifices I made, and the problems I solved had kept our lives running smoothly, yet none of it was appreciated until it was gone. Today, my life is peaceful in a way I never imagined possible. I wake up surrounded by people who respect my knowledge, value my work, and care about me as a person instead of seeing me as someone to depend on whenever life becomes difficult. That kind of respect is worth more than any title or paycheck. If there's one lesson my story taught me, it's this: love should never require you to lose yourself. Helping family is a beautiful thing, but it should never come at the cost of your dignity or self-worth. Sometimes the strongest form of revenge isn't hurting the people who mistreated you. It's choosing a better life and refusing to keep rescuing those who never appreciated your sacrifices.